In the vast expanse of a galaxy, where countless species bow to superior technology and ancient bloodlines, humanity stands as the unexpected wild card. We are neither the strongest nor the wisest, yet we possess something that even the most advanced civilizations struggle to understand: the willingness to sacrifice everything for a stranger's smile. This is the story of Marcus Chun, a human cargo pilot whose simple act of kindness toward a mysterious refugee would reshape the balance of power across 3-star systems. He thought he was saving an ordinary girl from slavers. She thought he was just another species too primitive to recognize royalty when it stood before him. Both were wrong. Both were right. And both were about to discover that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't a weapon or a crown. It's a human who refuses to walk away from someone in need. What happens when humanity's greatest weakness becomes its most terrifying strength? When a galaxy's most overlooked species becomes its most unpredictable protector? The answer lies in a single moment of choice, echoing across the stars, proving once again that humans don't just survive. They protect, they fight, and they never, ever give up. The cargo bay of the wandering star hummed with the steady vibration of hyperspace travel, a sound that Marcus Chun had grown to love over his 15 years as an independent freight hauler. The smell of recycled air mixed with machine oil and the faint aroma of yesterday's coffee created an atmosphere that felt more like home than any planet ever had. Marcus checked his navigation console for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. A habit born from years of running supplies to frontier colonies where pirates lurked in asteroid fields like wolves in shadows. His destination was Kepler Station, a trading hub on the edge of civilized space where questions weren't asked and credits talked louder than credentials. The cargo hold behind him contained medical supplies, water purifiers, and entertainment modules bound for the mining colonies of the Outer Rim. It was honest work that paid decent money, and Marcus had learned long ago that honest work was hard to find in a galaxy where humans were still considered newcomers. The proximity alarm chimed, pulling Marcus from his thoughts. His fingers danced across the control panel, switching from autopilot to manual control as a distress beacon appeared on his scanner. The signal was weak, barely detectable against the background radiation of nearby nebula. Marcus frowned at the readings. Whatever was broadcasting that signal was small, probably a shuttle or escape pod, and it was running out of power fast. Standard protocol dictated that he report the distress call to the nearest patrol ship and continue on his route. Getting involved in rescue operations could mean delays, investigations, and, worst of all, unpaid time. But Marcus had never been good at following standard protocol, especially when lives might be at stake. His grandmother used to say that the measure of a person wasn't found in their successes, but in the moments when no one was watching and they had to choose between easy and right. Marcus adjusted course toward the signal, his ship's sensors gradually painting a clearer picture of what he was approaching. The object was indeed an escape pod, its hull scarred with blast marks that suggested it had fled from combat. The power signature was almost zero, life support failing. If there was anyone alive inside that pod, they had minutes at most. The docking procedure took longer than Marcus would have liked, but rushing with damaged spacecraft was a good way to kill everyone involved. When the airlock finally, sealed with a satisfying hiss, Marcus grabbed his emergency medical kit and cycled through to the pod's interior. The smell hit him first, the acrid stench of burnt electronics, mixed with something that might have been blood. Inside the cramped pod, Marcus found her. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old by human standards, though with alien species, it was always difficult to tell. Her skin had a pale blue tint that reminded Marcus of winter mornings on Earth, and her hair was the color of starlight, silver white, and flowing despite the chaos that had obviously occurred. She was unconscious, strapped into the pilot seat with restraints that looked far too sophisticated for a simple escape pod. But what caught Marcus's attention weren't her obvious alien features, or even the elaborate clothes she wore beneath a torn and bloody cloak. It was the way she held herself, even unconscious. There was something about her posture, a natural grace that spoke of confidence and authority. Even battered and helpless, she looked like someone who was accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus checked her vital signs with his scanner. The readings were unfamiliar, her biology clearly non-human, but the pattern suggested she was alive and stable, though severely injured. A deep gash ran along her left arm, and several smaller cuts decorated her face and hands. Whatever she'd escaped from, it hadn't been pleasant. As he worked to stabilize her injuries, Marcus noticed details that made him increasingly curious about his unexpected passenger. Her clothes were made from materials he didn't recognize, fabrics that seemed to shift color slightly in the light. The jewelry she wore wasn't just decorative. Some pieces hummed with their own energy signatures, suggesting advanced technology integrated into what appeared to be ceremonial ornaments. More concerning were the blast marks on the escape pod's hull. Marcus had seen enough combat damage to recognize the patterns. These weren't random pirate attacks or accidents. The scoring was precise, methodical, the kind of damage that came from professional military weapons. Someone had wanted this pod destroyed, and they nearly succeeded. Marcus carefully transferred the girl to his ship's small medical bay, setting up in 4-line with universal nutrients and monitoring her vital signs. She remained unconscious throughout the process, but her breathing steadied as his ship's better life support systems took over. While she rested, Marcus returned to examine the escape pod more thoroughly. Hidden in a concealed compartment behind the pilot's seat, he found a small data crystal that had somehow survived whatever destroyed the rest of the pod's electronics. The crystal was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own internal light. Marcus had seen similar devices before, usually containing navigation data or personal records. This one felt different somehow, heavier than its size should have allowed, as if it contained more than simple information. The girl stirred as Marcus returned to check on her, her eyes fluttering open to reveal irises that shifted between blue and green like ocean water. She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the medical bay's padded surface. When she spoke, her voice was musical, with an accent Marcus couldn't place. "Where am I?" she asked in heavily accented standard, the common language used for trade throughout the galaxy. "You're safe," Marcus replied, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm Marcus Chen. I found your escape pod, drifting near the Kepler Nebula. Your life support was failing." She studied his face carefully, her shifting eyes taking in every detail. "You're human," she said, and there was something in her tone that Marcus couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe a relief. "Guilty as charged," Marcus said with a slight smile. "What's your name? And what happened to you out there?" The girl hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing her options. Finally, she said, "My name is Lyra. I was traveling with merchants when pirates attacked our convoy. I barely escaped." It was a reasonable story, the kind that happened often enough in the frontier regions of space. But something about the way she told it made Marcus think she was leaving out important details. The quality of her clothes, the sophisticated technology of her jewelry, the professional military damage to her pod, none of it quite fit with a simple merchant convoy attack. But Marcus had learned that everyone had secrets, especially in the outer systems where the rule of law was more suggestion than fact. As long as those secrets didn't endanger his ship or his life, he was content to let sleeping dogs lie. "Well, Lyra," he said, checking her 4-line, "you're welcome to stay aboard until we reach Kepler Station. I could drop you off there, and you can book passage to wherever you need to go." Relief flooded her features, followed quickly by something that looked like gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. I have no way to repay your kindness." Marcus waved off her concern. "Don't worry about it. We humans have a saying, what goes around comes around. Maybe someday you'll help someone else who needs it." Over the next few days, as they traveled toward Kepler Station, Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying Lyra's company. She was intelligent and curious, asking countless questions about human culture, Earth's history, and Marcus's experiences as a trader. She seemed particularly fascinated by human concepts of democracy and individual rights, ideas that she claimed were rare in her part of the galaxy. In return, Lyra shared stories about her own people, whom she described as the ethereal, inhabitants of crystal cities on worlds far from human space. She spoke of technology that sounded like magic and political systems so complex that Marcus couldn't quite follow them. Her descriptions painted a picture of an advanced civilization, though she was always vague about her own role within it. Marcus noticed that Lyra was careful never to be alone when he was working on ship repairs or maintenance. She stayed close, watching him with those color-shifting eyes, as if memorizing everything he did. At first, he assumed she was simply curious about human technology, but gradually he began to realize she was studying him as much as his equipment. "Your people fascinate me," she said one evening as they shared dinner in the ship's small galley. "You help strangers without expecting reward. You risk your safety for people you've never met. This is not common among the species I know." Marcus shrugged. "Maybe we're just too dumb to know better," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "But I'd rather be an idiot who helps people than a genius who walks past suffering." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, those shifting eyes seeming to look right through him. "Your people are stronger than they appear," she said quietly. "We get by," Marcus replied, not sure why her words made him feel slightly uncomfortable. It wasn't until the fourth day that Marcus realized they were being followed. The pursuing ship was good at staying hidden, using the nebula's radiation to mask its energy signature. Marcus only spotted it because he'd spent years learning to read the subtle signs that meant danger in space. A slight gravity distortion here, an energy reading that didn't quite match the background radiation there. Piece by piece, the evidence built up until he was certain someone was tracking them. Marcus didn't mention his suspicions to Lyra immediately. Instead, he began taking evasive actions, altering course slightly, changing speed, using asteroid fields and sensor shadows to test his theory. Each time, the pursuing ship adjusted its position to maintain contact. Whatever they wanted, they were professional enough to be persistent about it. That night, as Lyra slept in the passenger cabin Marcus had prepared for her, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Using the ship's long-range communications array, he sent a coded message to his old friend Jake Morrison, a former military man who now ran security for merchant convoys. The message was simple: "Got company. Need backup at Kepler. Standard rates." Jake's response came back within hours. "On my way. Watch your six." Marcus sealed the message logs and returned to his cabin, unaware that in the passenger section of his ship, Lyra lay awake, her enhanced hearing having caught every word of his transmission. Tears that glowed faintly in the darkness ran down her blue-tinted cheeks as she realized that this strange, kind human was preparing to risk his life to protect someone he barely knew. For the first time in years, Princess Lyra of the Ethereal Dynasty felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The next morning brought new challenges as proximity alarms indicated multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace nearby. Marcus's blood ran cold as he identified the energy signatures. These weren't pirates or casual hunters. The ships closing on his position were Shadowhawk-class interceptors, military vessels used by only the most powerful and ruthless organizations in the galaxy. "Lyra," Marcus called, his voice tight with controlled tension. "I think we need to talk." She appeared in the cockpit doorway, her face pale but composed. "They found me," she said simply. "Who's found you?" Marcus demanded, his hands flying over the controls as he pushed his cargo hauler to maximum speed. "And don't tell me they're pirates. Those are military ships out there." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, watching the tactical display as the pursuing vessels closed the distance with inexorable precision. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft Marcus had a strain to hear her. "There are things about me that I haven't told you," she said. "Things that put you in danger just by knowing them." "No kidding," Marcus muttered, trying to coax more speed from his overloaded engines. "Want to fill me in before we both get vaporized." But before Lyra could answer, The communications array crackled to life. The voice that filled the cockpit was cold, mechanical, and speaking in a language Marcus didn't recognize. Lyra went rigid at the sound, her face draining of what little color it had possessed. "They're demanding I surrender myself," she translated, her voice barely above a whisper. "They promise that if I comply, they'll allow you to leave unharmed." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to his controls. "Tell them to go to hell," he said calmly, routing more power to the engines. "We're not giving up." "Marcus, you don't understand," Lyra protested. "These people, they'll destroy your ship without hesitation. They'll kill you to get to me." "Then, I guess we better make sure they don't catch us," Marcus replied, his jaw set in determination. He activated the ship's emergency beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Independent Trader Wandering Star requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by unknown military vessels. Any ships in the area, please respond." As the first energy bolts from the pursuing ships lit up the darkness around them, Marcus Chun made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. He chose to stand between a stranger and those who would harm her, not knowing that the stranger was royalty, not caring that the enemies were beyond his ability to defeat. He chose to be human, and in that choice, the galaxy was about to discover why humanity, despite being the youngest and seemingly weakest species in space, was also the most dangerous when pushed too far. The wandering star shuddered under the impact of another energy blast, its shields flaring bright blue before dimming dangerously. Marcus gritted his teeth as warning lights painted the cockpit in angry reds and oranges, while Lyra gripped her seat with knuckles that had gone white beneath her pale blue skin. The pursuing Shadowhawk interceptors were closing fast, their superior speed and firepower making this less a chase and more a countdown to destruction. "Shields at 30%, Marcus announced, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "Hull integrity holding, but we can't take much more of this." Through the viewports, space lit up with deadly beauty as more energy bolts streaked past them. The interceptors were toying with them, Marcus realized. Ships that advanced could have destroyed his cargo hauler with a single focused volley. Instead, they were hurting him, trying to force him to surrender or make a mistake that would leave him dead in space. "Marcus, please," Lyra said, her musical voice strained with anguish. "Let me surrender. This is my fight, not yours. You shouldn't die for someone you barely know." Marcus spared her a quick glance, noting the tears that glowed faintly against her cheeks. "Funny thing about humans," he said, wrestling with the controls as another blast sent shockwaves through the ship. "We're not real good at math when it comes to doing the right thing. 1 person, 10 people doesn't matter. Wrong is wrong." Before Lyra could respond, Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the communications array, distorted by distance and interference, but unmistakably human. "Marcus, you magnificent bastard. What have you gotten yourself into this time?" On the tactical display, new contacts appeared, dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 3 ships, running dark until the moment they emerged from faster-than-light travel. Marcus felt a surge of relief as he recognized the energy signatures. Jake's converted patrol ship Retribution, flanked by 2 heavy fighters piloted by other former military humans who'd found work in the private sector. "Jake," Marcus called back, adjusting course to take advantage of the confusion his friend's arrival had created among the interceptors. "Nice timing. We've got company that doesn't want to take no for an answer." "So, I see," Jake's voice replied, and Marcus could hear the grim satisfaction that came with long-awaited payback. "Boys, we've got Shadowhawk interceptors harassing a civilian vessel. I don't know about you, but that kind of behavior just rubs me the wrong way." The 2 fighter pilots responded with enthusiastic agreement, their voices carrying the particular mix of professionalism and barely controlled violence that Marcus remembered from his own brief military service. These were men who'd seen too much combat, lost too many friends, and found themselves on the wrong side of politics when the wars ended. They made their living now protecting merchant convoys and independent traders, but they never lost their hatred for bullies. "This is Commander Thex of the Ethereal Royal Guard," came a new voice over the communications array, speaking accented but precise standard. "The human vessel is harboring a fugitive from ethereal justice. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Jake's response was immediate and decidedly unprofessional. "This is Captain Morrison of the Independent Security Force. The human vessel is under our protection. You want to face consequences? Keep shooting." What happened next was a masterclass in the kind of combat tactics that had made humanity feared throughout the galaxy despite their technological disadvantages. The three human ships didn't try to match the Shadowhawks in raw firepower or advanced shielding. Instead, they used speed, unpredictability, and a willingness to take risks that bordered on insanity. Jake's patrol ship came in fast and low, using the cargo hauler's bulk as cover while his gunners targeted the interceptor's sensor arrays with surgical precision. The two fighters split apart, diving toward the enemy ships from different angles, forcing the Shadowhawks to divide their attention. None of the human ships had shields that could withstand sustained fire from military-grade weapons, but they moved like dancers, never staying in one place long enough for the enemy to lock on. Marcus watched the battle unfold with professional appreciation and personal terror. His friends were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were fighting with the particular ferocity that humans brought to protecting their own. Energy beams crisscrossed space in deadly patterns while ships spun and dove through three-dimensional combat that would have been impossible in an atmosphere. "Marcus," Jake's voice came through the static of battle. "We can keep them busy for a while, but these boys are packing some serious heat. You need to get your passenger to safety and figure out why half the Royal Guard want her back so badly." As if summoned by his words, Lyra suddenly stood and moved to the communications console. Her fingers danced over controls with surprising familiarity, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that Marcus had never heard before. "Commander Thex, this is Princess Lyra of the Third House," she said, using formal titles that made Marcus's head snap around in shock. "I am under the protection of this human and his companions. By the ancient laws of Sanctuary, I demand that you withdraw and report my status to the High Council." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Even the sounds of battle seemed to fade as the implications of what she'd said sank in. Marcus stared at the woman he'd thought was a refugee, seeing her with new eyes. The way she held herself, the natural command in her voice, the expensive technology integrated into her jewelry, it all made sense now. "Princess," Commander Thex's voice returned, now laden with uncertainty and barely concealed fear. "Your father has declared you dead. The succession has been finalized. There is no going back." Lyra's face hardened, her color-shifting eyes blazing with inner fire. "My father acted without proof of death and in violation of succession law. I live, I breathe, and I claim my rights under the old codes. Stand down, Commander, before you commit treason against the rightful heir." Marcus felt the deck plates vibrate under his feet as the battle outside intensified. Jake's ships were holding their own, but barely. The interceptors were regrouping, their commanders apparently receiving new orders from whoever was really in charge of this operation. "Your Highness," came another voice, older and more cultured than the commanders. "This is Lord Chancellor Vex. Your father mourns your supposed death, but the kingdom cannot remain in chaos. Your younger brother has been crowned. The succession is complete. Return with us, and you may live out your days in comfortable exile." Lyra laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Comfortable exile under my stepmother's watchful eye, you mean? How long would I live, Lord Chancellor? A month? A week? Long enough for dear stepmother to consolidate her son's claim to my throne." Marcus was beginning to understand the situation, and he didn't like what he was learning. Royal succession, palace intrigue, assassination attempts. This was exactly the kind of political nightmare that independent traders spent their lives trying to avoid. But As he watched Lorelei stand straight and proud despite her injuries, he found himself not caring about the complications. "Jake," he called into his communicator, "we need to get out of here. Can you buy us enough time to jump to hyperspace?" "Working on it," Jake replied, his voice tight with concentration. "But these Royal Guard types aren't giving up easy. They really want a girl back." "She's not my girl," Marcus started to say, then stopped as he realized how defensive he sounded. "Just get us clear, and I'll owe you the biggest favor of your life." What happened next will be talked about in spacer bars and military academies for decades to come. Jake Morrison, veteran of 3 colonial wars and survivor of the Battle of Centauri Station, made a decision that epitomized humanity's approach to impossible odds. He got creative. Instead of continuing the conventional dogfight, Jake suddenly broke off his attack run and dove straight toward the nearest interceptor, his ship's hull groaning under the acceleration. The Shadowhawk's pilot, trained in traditional combat tactics, fired everything he had at the approaching human ship. Jake's shields collapsed, his hull began to buckle, but he didn't pull away. At the last possible moment, Jake ejected his ship's entire cargo bay, 20 tons of mining equipment that had been bound for the outer colonies. The makeshift projectiles, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, tore through the interceptor's shields like paper. The enemy ship, caught completely off guard by such an unorthodox tactic, took critical damage and began tumbling out of control. The remaining interceptors hesitated, their pilots trying to process what they'd just witnessed. In that moment of confusion, the 2 human fighters pressed their advantage, targeting the damaged ship's escorts with coordinated attacks that spoke of years of combat experience. "Now will be good, Marcus." Jake's voice cut through the chaos as his battered ship limped away from the spreading debris field. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. His hands flew over the navigation controls, plotting a jump to hyperspace that would take them far from the battle zone. The wandering star's hyperdrive spun up with a whine of stressed machinery. Space began to twist around them, and then they were gone, leaving behind only the fading energy signature of their passage and 3 very confused Royal Guard commanders trying to explain to their superiors how a cargo hauler and 3 human ships had outfought a squadron of the most advanced interceptors in the ethereal navy. In the relative quiet of hyperspace, Marcus finally turned to face Lyralii, who was slumped in her seat as if the authority she'd displayed during the battle had drained all her strength. "Princess," he said quietly. She nodded without looking at him. "Princess Lyralii of the 3rd House, heir to the ethereal throne, daughter of King Therendil the Just." Her voice was bitter as she spoke the titles. "Though it seems my father is neither as just nor as loving as his name suggests." Marcus absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the royal titles with the injured girl he'd rescued from a failing escape pod. "So, when you said pirates attacked your convoy, I lied," she admitted, finally meeting his eyes. "There was no convoy. I was fleeing the palace after my stepmother tried to have me assassinated. The blast marks on my pod came from Royal Guard weapons." "Your own guards tried to kill you?" "Guards loyal to my stepmother," Lyralii corrected. "She's been positioning her supporters throughout the military for years, waiting for the right moment to eliminate me and secure the throne for her son." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the implications of what he'd gotten himself into. "And now I've kidnapped the heir to an alien throne." "Great. Just great. You saved me," Lyralii said firmly. "Without you, I would have died in that pod, and my stepmother would have won. The question now is what happens next." Before Marcus could answer, proximity alarms began sounding again. New ships were dropping out of hyperspace around them, but these weren't the sleek interceptors they'd faced before. These were heavy cruisers, battleships that could reduce his cargo hauler to atoms with their main guns. "Princess Lyralii," came a new voice over the communications array, speaking in the musical language of the ethereal. "This is Admiral Corith of the 3rd Fleet. By order of Queen Seraphina, Regent of the Ethereal Kingdom, you will surrender yourself immediately or face the consequences." Lyralii translated quickly for Marcus, her face pale with fear. Admiral Corith is my stepmother's brother. He commands the Third Fleet, and he's completely loyal to her faction. Marcus looked at the tactical display, counting at least a dozen heavy warships surrounding his position. Jake and his fighters were nowhere to be seen, probably still dealing with the aftermath of the earlier battle. The Wandering Star was alone, outgunned, and carrying cargo that apparently half the galaxy wanted to get their hands on. "Any suggestions, Your Highness?" Marcus asked, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical display with the eye of someone trained in military strategy from birth. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of difficult decisions made under impossible circumstances. "There's a human colony called Haven's Rest about 6 hours from here," she said slowly. "It's a neutral space, technically outside my father's jurisdiction. If we can make it there." "What's at Haven's Rest?" Marcus asked, already plotting a course to the colony. "Sanctuary," Lyra replied, "and possibly the only people in the galaxy who might be willing to help us." Marcus engaged the hyperdrive, feeling the familiar twist of space-time as they jumped away from the waiting fleet. As the stars streaked past the viewports, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover just how far one human was willing to go to protect someone who'd never asked for his help. Behind them, Admiral Corith watched the energy signature of their jump fade from his sensors and smiled coldly. Let the human think he was clever. There were agents of the Queen throughout the outer colonies, and Haven's Rest was no exception. The hunt would continue, and this time, there would be no escape. Haven's Rest hung in space like a jewel against the darkness, its rotating habitat rings catching the light of the system's twin suns. The human colony was a testament to ingenuity and determination, built from salvaged ship hulls, asteroid mining platforms, and pure stubborn refusal to accept that some places in the galaxy were too dangerous to call home. As Marcus guided the Wandering Star toward the docking bays, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what his species had accomplished in this remote corner of space. "It's beautiful," Lyra said softly, pressed against the viewport as she watched the colony's lights twinkle in the artificial twilight of the docking ring. "I've never seen anything like it." "Humans have a talent for making homes in places that should kill them," Marcus replied, opening a communication channel to Haven's Rest traffic control. "It's probably our most useful skill, right after our ability to make enemies out of people who should know better." The traffic controller's voice crackled through the speakers with a characteristic accent of the Outer Rim colonies, part Earth Standard, part Frontier drawl, and entirely practical. "This is Haven's Rest Control to approaching vessel. Please state your business and duration of stay." "Haven's Rest Control, this is Marcus Chun aboard the Wandering Star," Marcus responded, "requesting emergency docking and sanctuary for political refugees. We may have company coming, and it's the unfriendly kind." There was a pause, followed by a different voice, older and carrying the weight of authority. "Marcus Chun, this is Colony Administrator Sarah Martinez. Are you telling me you've brought trouble to our doorstep?" Marcus winced slightly. Sarah Martinez was a legend in the outer colonies, a former military officer who'd helped establish Haven's Rest 15 years earlier when the territorial wars forced thousands of humans to flee deeper into space. She was known for her fairness, her strength, and her absolute intolerance for anyone who endangered her people. "Administrator Martinez, I rescued someone who turns out to be more important than I initially realized. There are military ships hunting us, and innocent people might get hurt if we're not careful about this." Another pause, longer this time. Then, Docket Bay 7. "Security teams are already mobilizing. You have a lot of explaining to do, Mr. Chun." As the Wandering Star settled into its assigned berth, Marcus could see the security preparations Sarah had mentioned. Haven's Rest might be a civilian colony, but many of its residents were former military personnel, and they moved with the efficiency of professionals. Guard positions were being established, weapon systems were coming online, and evacuation protocols were clearly being reviewed. "They're preparing for war," Lyralii observed, watching the activity through the viewports. Because of me, they're preparing to protect their home, Marcus corrected. It's what humans do when someone threatens our people. The airlock cycled, and Sarah Martinez stepped aboard with an escort of 4 security officers. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a military bun and eyes that missed nothing. When she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions on behalf of thousands of people. "Mr. Chun," she said with a nod, "you certainly know how to make an entrance. And you must be the refugee in question." She turned to Lyralii with professional assessment. "Ethereal, by the look of you. Nobility, judging by the clothes and the way you carry yourself. Care to tell me exactly what kind of hornet's nest you've kicked over?" Lyralii straightened, and Marcus saw her assume the posture and bearing of royalty. "Administrator Martinez, I am Princess Lyralii of the Third House, rightful heir to the ethereal throne. I seek sanctuary under the ancient laws while I gather evidence of treason and attempted murder within my father's court." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly, but otherwise she showed no reaction to learning she was talking to alien royalty. "And the ships that are hunting you? What kind of firepower are we looking at?" "Third Fleet units under Admiral Corith," Lyralii replied. "Heavy cruisers, battle destroyers, probably a carrier group. They're operating under orders from Queen Seraphina, my stepmother, who has assumed the regency in my supposed absence." "Supposed?" Sarah asked. "She believes me dead," Lyralii explained. "Or at least, she's told everyone I'm dead while she consolidates power behind her son's claim to the throne." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the political and military implications of the situation. Finally, she turned to Marcus. "And you decided to get involved in a royal succession dispute because—" Marcus shrugged. "She was dying in an escape pod. I couldn't just leave her there." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head with what might have been admiration or exasperation. "Only you, Marcus. Only you would accidentally kidnap alien royalty while trying to do a good deed." Before Marcus could respond, proximity alarms began blaring throughout the docking bay. The security team immediately went to high alert, weapons drawn, and communications crackling with reports from the colony's sensor stations. "Administrator," came a voice over the facility's public address system, "we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Configuration matches ethereal Third Fleet vessels. They're requesting immediate surrender of fugitives aboard a human cargo vessel." Sarah's expression hardened. "And so it begins." She activated her personal communicator. "All stations, this is Administrator Martinez. We are now under the protection protocols of the Sanctuary Accords. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Throughout Haven's Rest, centuries of human military tradition swung into action. Veterans who'd been teachers, mechanics, farmers, and shopkeepers transformed back into soldiers. Weapon systems that had been installed for protection against pirates powered up to face military-grade threats. Children were evacuated to the colony's deepest sections while their parents prepared to defend the only home they'd known. "Your Highness," Sarah said, turning back to Lyralii, "I need you to understand something. My people have built their lives here. They've raised children here, buried loved ones here, invested everything they have in making this place work. If protecting you puts them at risk, I will turn you over to those ships without hesitation." Lyralii nodded gravely. "I understand, Administrator. I wouldn't ask you to sacrifice your people for a stranger. But," Sarah continued, "if those ships fire on civilian targets or try to board my station without permission, I will consider that an act of war against neutral territory. And I promise you, Princess, humans don't lose wars easily." The communications system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The voice that filled the docking bay was crisp, military, and utterly arrogant. "Human colony Haven's Rest? This is Admiral Corith of the Third Fleet. You are harboring a fugitive from ethereal justice. Surrender Princess Lyralii immediately, and No action will be taken against your facilities. Sarah stepped to the communications console and replied with calm professionalism. Admiral Corith, this is Colony Administrator Martinez. Princess Lyra has requested sanctuary under the Ancient Accords. As a neutral facility, we are obligated to provide protection while her case is reviewed. There is no case to review. Corith's voice snapped back. The princess is dead. The person you harbor is an imposter, a criminal attempting to destabilize the legitimate government. Marcus saw Lyra flinch at the words, and he felt anger rising in his chest. Whatever political games were being played here, he'd seen enough to know that the woman beside him was exactly who she claimed to be. The way she spoke her native language, the familiarity with protocol, the automatic assumption of authority. These weren't things that could be faked. Admiral, Sarah's voice remained steady. We'll need to see proof of death and verification of the current succession before we can act on your claims. Until then, the princess remains under our protection. The response was immediate and chilling. Administrator Martinez, you have 1 hour to surrender the fugitive. After that time, my ships will board your station and retrieve her by force. Any resistance will be met with appropriate military response. The channel went dead, leaving the docking bay in tense silence. Marcus could see the wheels turning in Sarah's head as she calculated odds and options. Haven's Rest was well defended for a civilian colony, but it wasn't a military fortress. Against Third Fleet units, they might hold out for hours, maybe days if they were very lucky. Administrator, one of the security officers spoke up. Sensor readings showed 12 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and what looks like a light carrier. They're taking positions around the colony. Sarah nodded grimly. They're not here to negotiate. They're here to end this quickly and quietly. She turned to Lyra. Your Highness, is there anything you can tell us about Admiral Corith? Anything we can use? Lyra, consider the question carefully. He's my stepmother's brother, completely loyal to her faction. He's also arrogant and overconfident. He believes alien species, especially humans, are inherently inferior to ethereal. He won't expect serious resistance from a civilian colony. Then, he's about to get an education, Sarah said with grim satisfaction. She activated her communicator again. All defense stations, this is Control. Targets are Third Fleet vessels surrounding the colony. They've issued an ultimatum. In 57 minutes, we show them why you don't threaten human civilians. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what Sarah was planning. Administrator, you can't seriously be considering fighting Third Fleet units. They'll destroy the colony. Mr. Chun, Sarah replied, turning to face him with eyes that had seen too much war and too much loss. Do you know what the Sanctuary Accords are? Marcus shook his head, though he was beginning to suspect he wasn't going to like the answer. 50 years ago, when humans first began establishing colonies in the outer systems, we were preyed upon by every species that thought we were easy targets. Pirates, slavers, military units from a dozen different governments, they all assumed that because we were new to space, we were weak. Sarah's voice carried the weight of painful history. The Sanctuary Accords were our response. Every human colony, every human station, agreed to provide protection for any civilian seeking asylum, regardless of species or politics. She gestured toward the viewports where the lights of Haven's Rest continued to shine defiantly against the darkness. But, more importantly, we agreed that any attack on one human sanctuary was an attack on all human sanctuaries. Touch one of our colonies, and you answer to all of them. As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on the sensor displays. Ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, running fast and hard toward Haven's Rest. Marcus recognized some of the configurations, converted cargo haulers like his own, fitted with military-grade weapons. Private security vessels crewed by veterans. Even a few actual military ships, probably deserters who'd found new purpose protecting the outer colonies. Jesus, one of the security officers, breathed, watching the tactical display fill with new contacts. There must be 30 ships incoming. 43 at last count, Sarah corrected with a slight smile. including Jake Morrison and his team, who apparently decided to follow you here after their little engagement with the Royal Guard. Marcus stared at the display in amazement. Ships were still arriving, answering a call to arms that must have gone out the moment Admiral Corith made his threat. Humans from across this entire sector of space were converging on Haven's Rest, ready to fight and die for people they'd never met, simply because those people had asked for help. "This is impossible," Lyra said softly, her color-shifting eyes wide with disbelief. "No species would risk so much for strangers." Sarah looked at her with something approaching pity. "Your Highness, I think you're about to learn something important about humanity. We might not be the strongest species in the galaxy, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But when someone threatens one of ours, whether they're born human or just claimed by us, we have a tendency to take it personally." The communications system activated again, Admiral Corith's voice now carrying a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Human ships approaching Haven's Rest. You are interfering in internal ethereal affairs. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Jake Morrison's voice responded from the growing fleet of human vessels, carrying the casual insolence that Marcus remembered from their younger days. "Admiral Corith, this is Captain Morrison speaking for the Independent Defense Alliance. You threatened our people. Now we're going to show you why that was a mistake." What happened next would be remembered as the Battle of Haven's Rest, but Marcus would always think of it as the day humanity proved that family wasn't about blood or species. It was about standing together when everything else fell apart. The Third Fleet had superior technology, better weapons, stronger shields. But they faced an enemy that fought with the desperate courage of people protecting their homes, led by veterans who'd learned their tactics in the kind of wars where losing meant extinction. As energy beams began to light up space around the colony, Marcus found himself standing beside an alien princess, watching his own species demonstrate why they'd survived everything the galaxy had thrown at them. They didn't fight fair. They didn't follow conventional tactics. And they absolutely, positively never gave up. The battle for Haven's Rest raged for 18 hours, and when it was over, the tactical analysts from 3 different species would spend months trying to understand how a ragtag fleet of human civilian vessels had defeated one of the most elite military forces in the galaxy. The answer, Marcus realized as he watched the final Third Fleet survivors retreat in disorder, wasn't in their weapons or their technology. It was in their willingness to sacrifice everything for people they'd chosen to call family. Admiral Corith's flagship, the mighty dreadnought Star of Dominion, hung dead in space, its engines dark and its hull scarred by weapons that should never have been able to penetrate its advanced shielding. Around it, the wreckage of 6 other Third Fleet vessels drifted slowly, testament to the price of underestimating human determination. Status report. Sarah Martinez called out from Haven's Rest Command Center, where she coordinated the defense with the calm efficiency of someone who'd spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of fight. "Third Fleet is in full retreat," came the reply from one of the sensor technicians. "Remaining ships are jumping to hyperspace as fast as their drives can cycle. We're tracking approximately 30 vessels fleeing the system." Marcus stood beside Lyra in the observation deck, watching the cleanup operations begin. Rescue ships were already moving toward the damaged vessels, human and ethereal alike, because that was another thing about his species. They'd fight to the death one minute and risk their lives to save their enemies the next. "I don't understand," Lyra said quietly, her color-shifting eyes reflecting the lights of the rescue operations. "Your people had every reason to turn me over to Corith. You could have avoided all of this death and destruction." "Could have," Marcus agreed. "But that's not really how we work. Once you asked for help, you became our responsibility. That's just how it is." Through the command center speakers, Jake Morrison's voice reported in from the Retribution. "Sarah, we've got prisoners. Admiral Corith survived the destruction of his flagship, and he's asking to speak with the princess. Says he has information she needs to hear." Sarah looked to Lyra questioningly. The alien princess was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll speak with him." But I want Marcus there with me. 20 minutes later, they were in Haven's Rest's secure conference room, facing Admiral Corith across a metal table. The ethereal military commander looked nothing like the arrogant voice that had threatened their colony hours earlier. His elegant uniform was torn and stained, his pale blue skin was marked with cuts and bruises, and his eyes carried the hollow look of someone who'd seen his entire worldview shattered in the space of a single battle. "Your Highness," Corith said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology. And an explanation." Lyra studied her stepmother's brother carefully. "Speak." Corith looked down at his hands, gathering his thoughts. 3 months ago, Queen Seraphina showed me footage of her death. Security recordings from the palace showing your assassination by rebel forces. She said the recordings were too disturbing to release publicly, which is why your death was announced without evidence. "But I'm sitting right here," Lyra pointed out. "Yes," Corith agreed. "Which means the recordings were fabricated. Which means—" He paused, the implications clearly weighing on him. "Which means I've been manipulated into committing treason against the rightful heir to the throne." Marcus leaned forward. "Why are you telling us this now?" Corith looked up at him, and Marcus saw something surprising in the alien's eyes. Respect. "Because your people just fought a military force 10 times their size to protect someone they barely knew. Because they risked everything for the principle that sanctuary means something. Because—" He paused, struggling with the words. "Because I've spent my entire life believing that ethereal were superior to all other species, and today a bunch of civilian humans just taught me lessons about honor that I should have learned decades ago." Lyra was quiet for several minutes, processing what she'd heard. Finally, she asked, "What's the situation at home?" "Your brother has been crowned, but the coronation was rushed, and many nobles stayed away," Corith replied. "There are rumors about your death, questions about the evidence. Your stepmother's support isn't as solid as she wants everyone to believe." "And my father?" Corith hesitated. "King Thranduil is unwell. He's been increasingly isolated since your supposed death, making few public appearances. There are whispers that he's being kept sedated to prevent him from asking uncomfortable questions about the succession." Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind. "So, if Lyra returned with proof that she's alive, the entire succession becomes invalid," Corith confirmed. "Your stepmother's regency ends, your brother's coronation is nullified, and the throne reverts to the rightful heir. But only if I can make it home alive," Lyra added grimly. "And after today's battle, Seraphina will know exactly where I am and how determined I am to reclaim my birthright." Sarah Martinez, who had been listening quietly from the corner of the room, finally spoke up. "Your Highness, with respect, I think you're underestimating the political impact of what happened here today." All eyes turned to her as she activated a holographic display showing news feeds from across the galaxy. Headlines scrolled past in dozens of languages. "Human colony defeats ethereal fleet. Princess Lyra lives. Third fleet in full retreat. Sanctuary accords tested and proven." "The story is already spreading," Sarah continued. "Every news service in neutral space is covering the battle. Your stepmother can't suppress this information, and she can't claim you're dead when there's video footage of you speaking to Admiral Corith just hours ago." Marcus watched Lyra's face as the implications sank in. The political calculus had changed completely. What had started as a covert operation to eliminate a potential rival had become a very public demonstration of Queen Seraphina's willingness to use military force against neutral territories. "There's more," Sarah added, manipulating the display to show diplomatic communications. "The Galactic Council is calling for an emergency session. The Sanctuary Accords have formal backing from 17 different species, and attacking a sanctuary colony is considered an act of aggression against all of them." Admiral Corith looked up sharply. 17 species? But the Accords were just a human agreement. "Originally, yes," Sarah agreed. "But over the years, other species have joined. Refugees we've protected, colonies we've helped establish, trading partners who've benefited from our protection of civilian shipping lanes. Today's battle wasn't just humans against ethereal. It was the Sanctuary Alliance against military aggression. The full scope of what had happened was beginning to become clear. Queen Seraphina hadn't just attacked a human colony. She'd violated the most sacred principle of interstellar law by using military force against a neutral sanctuary. The political fallout would be enormous. "I need to get home," Lyra said suddenly, standing and beginning to pace. Before Seraphina can spin this as foreign interference or claim I'm being coerced by human allies, I need to appear before the High Council and present my case for the throne. "That's going to be dangerous," Marcus pointed out. "Your stepmother has already tried to kill you once." "But now she can't do it quietly," Lyra replied. "Too many people are watching. The whole galaxy knows I'm alive, and if something happens to me now, everyone will know who's responsible." Admiral Corith cleared his throat. "Your Highness, if I may, I still command the loyalty of significant portions of the Third Fleet. Officers who served your father faithfully for decades, who only followed my orders because they believed you were dead. If you return to ethereal space, you won't be doing so alone." Over the next several hours, they planned what Marcus privately thought of as the most audacious political maneuver in galactic history. Lyra would return to the ethereal capital world aboard a human diplomatic vessel, escorted by the reformed Third Fleet units and representatives from the Sanctuary Alliance. Her arrival would be broadcast live across the galaxy, making it impossible for her stepmother to silence or eliminate her. "I want Marcus to come with me," Lyra announced as they finalized the arrangements. "As my personal advisor and representative of the human colonies." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Your Highness, I'm a cargo pilot, not a diplomat. I don't know anything about royal courts or political protocol." "You know about doing the right thing even when it's dangerous," Lyra replied. "You know about standing up for people who can't protect themselves. Those are the only qualifications that matter." 3 days later, Marcus found himself in the most surreal situation of his life, standing in the throne room of the ethereal royal palace, wearing formal diplomatic robes and trying not to embarrass himself in front of several hundred alien nobles. The chamber was a masterpiece of crystal architecture, with soaring spires that caught and refracted light in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Lyra entered the throne room in full royal regalia, flanked by Admiral Corith and an honor guard of Third Fleet officers who had declared their loyalty to the rightful heir. She moved with the fluid grace of someone born to rule, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the awareness that despite all their preparations, this moment could still go terribly wrong. King Thranduil sat on the crystal throne, looking far older and more frail than Marcus had expected. Beside him, Queen Seraphina stood in the position traditionally reserved for the heir apparent, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "My daughter," King Thranduil said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber despite its weakness. "We were told you were dead." "I live, father," Lyra replied, her voice strong and clear, "and I have returned to claim my birthright and expose those who would steal it through deception and murder." What followed was 3 hours of formal accusations, counter-accusations, and political maneuvering that made Marcus's head spin. Lyra presented evidence of the assassination attempt, supported by Admiral Corith's testimony about the fabricated death recordings. Queen Seraphina's supporters argued that the evidence was forged, that Lyra had been compromised by her time among humans, that her return was part of a foreign plot to destabilize the kingdom. But the tide of the debate turned when King Thranduil, speaking with more strength than he'd shown in months, made his decision. "The evidence is clear," he said, his voice echoing through the throne room. "My daughter lives, the succession remains unchanged, and those who conspire to usurp the throne will face justice." He turned to look directly at Queen Seraphina. "Your regency is ended. Your son's coronation is null and void. And you, dear wife, are under arrest for treason." The aftermath moved quickly. Queen Seraphina and her most loyal supporters were taken into custody, while those who had been coerced or deceived were offered amnesty in exchange for their cooperation. Prince Valdris, Lyraliai's young half-brother, publicly renounced any claim to the throne and was granted exile to a comfortable estate on a distant world. Through it all, Marcus stood at Lyraliai's side, representing not just humanity, but the principle that had started this entire adventure. The idea that sometimes the most important thing you could do was help a stranger in need. So what happens now? Marcus asked as they stood on the palace balcony, looking out over the crystal city that would soon be Lyraliai's to rule. Now, I learned how to be a queen, Lyraliai replied, and I try to build the kind of kingdom my father dreamed of, one where strength is measured not by military power, but by the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. She turned to face him, her color-shifting eyes reflecting the setting sun. I have a proposition for you, Marcus Chun. Stay here as my advisor. Help me build bridges between my people and yours. Show the ethereal that humans have more to offer than just courage in battle. Marcus considered the offer. The palace was beautiful, the position would be prestigious, and he genuinely cared about Lyraliai's success. But as he looked out over the alien city, he found himself thinking about the wandering star and the endless freedom of the space lanes. I'm honored, Your Highness, he said finally, but I think I'll stick to cargo hauling. The galaxy's a big place, and there are probably other people out there who could use a ride to safety. Lyraliai smiled, and Marcus realized it was the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her since that first day in his medical bay. I thought you might say that, but I have another proposition. What if the Ethereal Kingdom became the first major power to formally join the Sanctuary Accords? What if we made it official policy that any being seeking asylum would find protection in ethereal space? Marcus grinned. Now that sounds like something I could support. 6 months later, Captain Marcus Chun of the cargo hauler Wandering Star received a priority transmission while delivering supplies to a mining colony on the edge of known space. The message was from Queen Lyraliai of the Ethereal Kingdom, and it was brief. Cargo vessel in distress near Altair system. Could use a good pilot to help with the rescue. Standard rates plus hazard pay. Marcus laughed as he plotted a course for the Altair system. Some things, he reflected, never changed. The galaxy was full of people who needed help, and humanity would always be there to provide it. After all, it's what they did. 3 years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of interstellar relations following the Battle of Haven's Rest, they would focus on treaties signed and alliances formed, on the expansion of the Sanctuary Accords, and the establishment of new principles of interstellar law. But Marcus Chun, cargo pilot and accidental kingmaker, would always remember it differently. He would remember the moment when a dying girl in an escape pod taught him that sometimes the most important thing you could do was exactly what you were already doing, treating strangers with kindness, standing up for people who couldn't protect themselves, and never walking away from someone who needed help. In a galaxy full of ancient civilizations and advanced technologies, it turned out that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their ships or their tactical brilliance. It was their stubborn, illogical, utterly human refusal to let bad things happen to good people. And that, more than any crown or throne or royal title, was worth fighting for.